A warm welcome back, everyone. My name is Karen Saunders. Today's BEROEAN Pickets member Sabine, who's already been interviewed twice, part 1 and part 2, will be interviewed for the final time in part 3. This interview is split in two, so it's part 3A, and we'll be talking about the double standards and the suppression of free speech within the BEROEAN Pickets Bible study group. Sabine encountered this frequently, as did other ex-members, and so she just wants to finish off her interview by explaining what happened, how it made her feel, and what she intends to do moving forward. So without delay, I warmly welcome Sabine back to the channel, and as always, your comments, your supportive comments and kind feedback goes a long way into making the experience positive, even though we're dealing with very negative subjects. Your cooperation in this matter is always appreciated.
On part 1, we discussed how Sabine was lied and bullied to by Eric and Wendy. In part 2, we discussed how Wendy absolutely demolished friendships across the board, especially in the German group. And tonight, part 3, we're going to be discussing how Eric, in particular, used emotional control to suppress free speech, especially within the German group. So without further ado, I would like to welcome my very good friend, Sabine. How are you, Sabine? Welcome back.
I'm fine. Here we go again.
Takes as long as it takes, my friend. Things need to be exposed. Exactly.
Let's hope we can finish off today.
Well,
it's a lot to get through again. I'm really sorry.
No, you do not apologize. With that beautiful smile, you can do part 4, part 5, part 6 for my liking. You know, it's a pleasure to interview you, and you do it with such love, kindness, you know, understanding. This is a very, very sensitive subject. Eric and Wendy won't see it in the sense that we're trying to expose their behavior. Basically, they haven't made any changes. They've carried on their channels, you know, BEROEAN Pickets and BEROEAN Voices, and you know, they can do that. But we will continue to expose spiritual abuse, and tonight's interview is absolutely no different. You know, please take your time and explain what you need to explain.
Okay, let's get going then. In my last 2 interviews, as you already mentioned, I spoke about my uncomfortable experiences with BEROEAN Pickets addressing 2 core issues. It was Eric's smear campaign against our group and how we were kicked off the meeting schedule based on a lie. And then Wendy's alleged loving rebuke that felt more like spiritual abuse. These were the 2 main things. And then also what happened in our group because of Lutz and his wife. It's also important to understand if you want to have the full picture. If you missed them, make sure to watch parts 1 and 2, because you don't have much time to go into these details again. Today, let's dive deeper into the following topics. Forgiveness and mental health. Does forgiveness mean always fixing relationships by all means? Wendy calls me a thief, among other things. A spiritual wedding enabled by Eric's double standards. And then the core subject for this interview will be the debate in Sorge, how Eric used emotional control to suppress free speech. And also, instead of interacting on equal footing, Eric resorts to AI tools to accuse me of cognitive fallacies, and how this all affected my mental health. So I've been criticized for supposedly not forgiving Lutz. So I just want to clear up what forgiveness means to me based on scripture. Many Christians seem to confuse this so much nowadays. Wendy never actually asked me if I had forgiven Lutz. She just assumed I hadn't. But that's not the case. It's important to separate forgiveness from trust and restoration. Forgiveness isn't usually the problem for us. You would agree, wouldn't you? I mean, when we are loving people, we forgive. The real challenge we always face is afterwards, rebuilding trust again once it's been broken and fixing the relationship. And that would be also obviously the same thing now with Eric and Wendy here. The real challenge we would face if we heard from them back. But is it actually something we are expected to do as Christians? And is it always a healthy thing to go back to things like they were before? I recently watched a great video by Christian counselor Chris Wiens. She does really lovely videos about toxic relationships, narcissism in the Christian community, where she explains that forgiveness doesn't mean automatically trusting someone again after they've betrayed you. A lot of Christians, even counselors, pressure people into forgiving others, like Wendy did with me. Chris Wiens calls this spiritual gaslighting. And I think many aren't often aware of what they are doing there, you know. They might have good intentions at heart, you know. While many focus on Jesus' love, they forget he also set boundaries. He called out hypocrisy and didn't put up with toxic people. In Luke 17:3, Jesus talks about forgiveness, but he doesn't say we have to immediately trust people who've hurt us or let them keep treating us badly, taking advantage of us or walking all over us again. Forgiveness is for when someone repents and tries to make things right. Just wait a moment. I don't see you here. Yeah, my script just went big. Okay. Yeah.
Look, I'm just listening to you, and I agree with everything that you've said. And Chris Wiens, she's an amazing Christian counselor, a very good education video channel that she does there. She's very, very insightful and educative. So we have resources around narcissism, especially spiritual narcissism. And you are right. You know, Jesus doesn't expect us to forgive others, especially when they're not sorry.
Yeah.
Wendy and Eric have never apologized, and yet you and I and others in this BEROEAN Picket interview series, we've at different times held out an olive branch to them and said, you know, we love you, and if you want to come and chat with us, we're here. But you know, and I know, let's be honest about this. Eric and Wendy are personality types that will not come to the plate. They will not come to the table, and they will not put their hat down and say, okay, let's have a talk and a discussion about this, because they're too proud. I'm sorry to have to say this, Eric and Wendy. Your pride blinds you.
And there are people who really know me for many, many years, and they know that I'm a very soft-hearted person. And I'm so easy to, so fast to say, I'm sorry. If I really see that I'm sorry, I do it right away. You know, I don't want to drag it into the next day. I'm not a person dragging stuff into the next day. And that's really, really important to me. I'm actually, I like harmony in my life, you know, peace. I'm a peaceful person. And I don't like to actually stand up against bullying in the way I had to. This is not who I am, but I had to do it for our group.
You had to do it, exactly. Yes.
Anyway, you will see later, because I have also included a message now to Wendy I wrote last year about my feelings about the whole situation again. You know, we are coming to it later. And this explains it again. So it actually, she doesn't have any excuse, because she knew how I was actually I felt about the whole thing, how it had, what kind of toll it had taken on my mental health. She knew about it, you know. So
yes, and still didn't care. Still
no, she
didn't
didn't.
show any care. No,
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 no love, no love in
no.
action, just in words. You know, that's another
Yeah,
point.
exactly,
And
exactly. Yeah.
because love is about kindness, it's about, yeah, empathy, and not just spelling the word empathy, but living it, you know. So yeah,
Exactly,
let's go
exactly.
to that later. There's more to come that I find really troubling, I have to say. Now we are talking about Wendy was actually slandering me by accusing me of theft. Anyway, yeah. And now it gets pretty petty. I'm sorry to have
No,
to
don't
detail like
apologize.
this.
Say it as it is. Say it as it is, my friend. Go for it. Go for
Yeah.
it.
Wendy accused me of being a thief in her audio message to Suzanne on the 24th of September. She claimed we had nickeled and dimed them. That's a serious accusation, and I feel like I need to set the record straight here. Normally, I wouldn't even bring something like this up because I'm really generous, so I wouldn't go into all these details. And it really hurts that I have to do that, especially with someone who once considered me her closest friend. So here we go. Wendy asked Suzanne if I had mentioned the money she gave me. I had told both Stefan and Suzanne about it when tensions started rising between Eric and Wendy and us. Here's what actually happened. Wendy gave me 300 euros in the Netherlands, saying it was for unforeseen expenses and as a down payment. She also planned to give me half of her last commission from her previous real estate job, which was totaling 5,000 US dollar minus tax. Wendy knew about my living situation and said I deserved something in return for all I had done for the children of God. Even though I was hesitant, I'm going into that later, I accepted the 300 euros with the intention of using it for expenses related to the trip. We had planned to travel through Europe together for 4 to 6 weeks, and I had offered to use my car. Here's how I used the money. 52 euros went towards a Bible that we gave to Suzanne as a thank you for inviting us on the private yacht trip. Wendy and Eric had said they'd cover the cost of the Bible, but they never did. I told them if they paid for the Bible, I would chip in a nice Bible cover, which cost 67 euro, and so I did. I spent over 200, far over 200 euros on food, wine, mosquito spray, and boat items like really expensive eco-friendly toilet paper, sorry, and travel soap, things we needed to avoid polluting the water. They never offered to pay their share of those expenses. I had ordered things online before to make sure we had them with us already, as they were mandatory according to the boats company's regulations. I also bought board games worth 60 euros because I don't own any myself. I left them all in the UK when we left.
Right.
And Wendy asked me to bring some. When we went shopping during the 4 days of the trip and they gave me money, I always made sure they only paid for their share. I've always been very precise with money, and they knew that. So I always would say, no, that's enough. Here, take this back, you know. I paid a fine of 48.50 euro for our trip to the Amsterdam airport, which they said that they would cover and never did. Eric also asked me in Switzerland to buy eggs for the group's breakfast. So I laid out 60 euros for that, which I never received back. And for me, this is much money too, you know, not just for Eric and Wendy. So
No, exactly.
yeah. So I had booked a nice hotel room for Eric and Wendy in our village because we don't have enough space in our house for 5 nights, and had to cover the non-refundable costs. They never actually bothered to let me know they didn't need my help, or should I say service, anymore, so that I could have canceled in time. Instead, they purposely made double bookings at our German gathering, which I only found out later, and then just disappeared without even saying goodbye. I thought this was pretty cowardly of them.
How rude.
Wendy accusing me of theft is honestly shocking. I paid extra out of my own pocket and never even mentioned it. The 300 euros were meant as a donation, with more to come, which I wouldn't have accepted anyway. To insult me like this is just unfair and hurtful. Wendy knows how generous I am and how much I cared about her health. I even paid for natural remedies. Sonja offered her health advice for free. I'd also like to mention that last year we were very generous too. We paid for Eric's birthday cake and candles, just as Wendy I had asked us for, and we were actually going around to get the right kind of cake. It had to be a whole cake, so it was a Black Forest tart, you know.
Wow.
We also treated them to a nice restaurant. They asked me if we always go to places like that, and we told them, no, we don't. You know, we can't usually afford that kind of restaurant because we live a modest life and don't have any budget for things like that, you know.
Wow.
What I want to say is that Wendy knew we shared everything with them from the heart. So her accusation really hit me. On the other hand, it also shows clearly that Eric and Wendy take everything others do for them for granted. There is no real appreciation and lasting gratitude there, more a sense of entitlement. And then later, obviously, out of reach, out of memory. Yeah?
Yeah. Just listening to you explain this has just made me think about the interview that Suzanne did, where, you know, I couldn't quite get my head around the fact that Eric and Wendy, you know, were entitled people, you know, walking around like businessmen, you know, business people. But with you saying all of this, you know, that they just expected the very, very best. And as you said, you know, you didn't have a great deal of money. And then on top of that, driving around in your car, you know, that would have cost money in petrol, gas, you know, and there's no thank you. Not what, and then they just left you. They didn't even say goodbye.
They wanted to pay for the petrol and also for the costs of the car. And I said, oh, I haven't used the car much, or because obviously in the past 4 years, we couldn't use our car yet. We were locked down, you know. So,
Right. Okay.
So I said to them, petrol is fine. You know, I pay for the usage of the car. You don't need to worry. However, this shows that I didn't want to take advantage of them, you know. I've never came
More
into
like
my...
more like the other way around.
Yeah.
They took advantage of you. Oh,
Really
disgraceful. Yeah, disgraceful behavior. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So the next topic we cover a little bit more in depth now is the spiritual wedding. We touched on already a little bit at our German gathering. First of all, Eric and Wendy arrived at our German gathering in Sorge a day late now. On the 17th of August, after renting a car now from Frankfurt, which wasn't necessary because they could have driven with me. It turned out to be pretty expensive, as the brother with them mentioned. They left their luggage in the car, took a quick look around the house, and then left after lunch. They didn't like the rented house, so they ended up renting their own apartment. They later said they couldn't stay at our house because they had to work. But why even bother coming all the way to Europe to visit us? I'm always asking myself this question lately. What is it, just to ensure the meetings were a certain size? to secure cash donations. They must have realized they wouldn't get much from us after everything that had happened. Maybe that's why they were always focusing on future meetings. They were hardly ever truly present in the moment, you know, during the meeting. They were actually at. So they were always living with their mind already in the future. Had they already written us off? This was a question they discussed, you know. It sure seemed that way. The group was initially invited to the spiritual wedding ceremony, but later they were disinvited and asked to join for lunch instead. It seemed like they wanted to avoid any issues since the bride was still married to someone else. One brother later pointed out that it would have been considerate to inform everyone about the situation so they could decide whether to attend based on their own conscience. I think that's a fair point. The bride told me she found it odd to be marrying spiritually while still not divorced, and she didn't even know that something like this was possible. But Eric convinced them it was fine, since he had suggested it to the groom, who was his friend. The bride felt it was important to marry quickly to avoid sex outside of marriage. I was worried she was rushing things. She wasn't even divorced yet, and the groom had just lost his wife in March. Not wanting to pressure her, or want that she would be pressured or feel pressured at her wedding day, I asked what she'd do if she wasn't attracted to the groom. And she said she'd cancel the wedding, but still felt it was important to marry right away. They just had met for one day a few days before their wedding. It's strange to me that Eric insists others should obey authorities, but then picks and chooses when to follow the rules himself. Like with this marriage issue, he's ignoring the marriage laws. Why the double standard? The rule about marrying after you are divorced makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
I mean, I'm shaking my head in disbelief. I mean,
yeah.
Anybody listening to what you've just said there, the double standard. Here's the bride feeling that it was important to marry quickly to avoid sex outside of marriage, but she wasn't sure that a spiritual wedding would cover that, right?
Yeah.
So this is what I'm hearing. And then Eric goes completely against the legal setup in Europe, which I think is pretty similar to here and everywhere else, that, you know, if you want to be married legally, you have to register it. And here he's endorsing illegal weddings. I can't get my head around that. That's insane.
But with other things, he's more strict. You have to follow rules, you know. Talking about the pandemic medicine, for example, you know, you have to follow rules, you know, you have to obey. It's just clear. So he's just twisting it around like he pleases, basically, you know.
Yeah, double standards, absolutely. Sorry, go ahead, my friend.
Yeah. To me, this all felt like a violation of their conscience anyway. They weren't ready to marry spiritually while one partner was still married, and they didn't initially believe a spiritual marriage was even enough to live as a couple. In hindsight, a lot of people were offended when they found out the bride was still married to someone else. Eric didn't really think about how it would affect others, as we have just discussed. If you are excluding people from the ceremony because you think they might be offended, doesn't that make you question whether it's the right thing to do anyway, you know? And why this rush? Eric baptizes people without even asking if anyone else wants to do it, since he keeps track of how many he has baptized. Organizes spiritual weddings, which is usually the pastor's role. What gives him that authority? Apparently, he now also wants to translate his own Bible without knowing the original languages or the history behind it. Has he started his own religion? That's surely one way to look at it. This raises some serious concerns about Eric's leadership and ethics. He seems to manipulate situations for his own benefit, ignoring other people's conscience and choices. His double standards and questionable authority make it look like he's more focused on power and control than on truly guiding others in faith. Yeah, please, Karen.
Yeah, I'm just digesting all of this. So Eric's on about writing his own Bible. Does he have a background in ancient language? You know, like Aramaic,
I don't
Greek,
think so.
Hebrew. Not to
I
my
don't think
knowledge.
so. A brother I know told me, you know, he was in intense contact with Eric about this. So
is this so? Because I heard, I don't know if this is true, and I'm just putting it out there, everybody. I don't know if this is true, but is Eric connected some way with the 2001 Bible?
I've heard that as well.
I've heard that as well. We don't know if it's true, but the fact that he doesn't have any scholastic background, and you know the scriptures make it very clear not to add or take away anything from the Bible. You know, he's treading on dodgy ground. That's all I'm saying. That's what I think. But anyway, never mind. Who am I? Yeah, go ahead, my friend.
Yeah. I already mentioned in my first interview that many people questioned Eric's spirituality. Another situation came to my mind when I was thinking about it, preparing for our interview today. The day before our Swiss gathering, Eric, Wendy, their friend Armand, Sonia, and I went to visit our dear sister Margaret in her care home. Margaret had invited us for lunch. She had a severe stroke in November 2023, from which she's still recovering. Mentally, she's incredibly sharp, but sadly, she is still partially paralyzed. Every time we visit her, it's truly inspiring. She is so lovely. You just can't help but leave feeling uplifted and positive. She's also such an amazing example of faith and has a huge sense of humor. Wendy knows about this, but they didn't really make an effort. Looking back, I realized that out of the three of them, the only one who took care of Margaret with love was Armand. Armand obviously speaks German. But the language barrier wasn't an issue when Wendy and Eric stayed with Lutz and Heidelise for several days. They don't speak English, or not well at least, or at other gatherings. If they really wanted to communicate with someone, they just used electronic means. But when it suited them, they would hide behind the language barrier. In this case, Armand, Sonia, and I could have translated. I actually offered Wendy and Eric the shares right to Margaret, but Wendy turned it down and sat further away from her. During the meal, Eric and Wendy mostly had private conversations and weren't really present or engaged with the group. Eric then asked for a translation and spoke for maybe 5 minutes, but it was pretty superficial. Later, when we were in Margaret's room, I had to ask for a sandwich prayer for her. Do you know what a sandwich prayer is? Everyone joins in, basically.
No, I don't.
Everyone
Oh,
prays,
right, okay.
and the last person says amen, basically, you know. And so whoever wants to pray. So it was a group prayer.
Oh, how lovely.
And but I asked for it. You know, I was surprised that the suggestion didn't come from Eric. Wouldn't someone who is spiritual be happy to pray for further healing for a dear sister? I found this all really disappointing, because when Margaret gets spiritually going, she is such a huge encouragement to everyone, you know, and she couldn't shine. Like, it didn't give her this kind of opportunity, you know, to let that all out, you know.
Isn't that terrible? Isn't that terrible?
Yeah.
It's almost like they were embarrassed to be in her company. That's what I'm getting from it.
It could be, obviously, Eric has got loads of health issues. Perhaps he didn't feel comfortable, you know, and he might be thinking, or they might be thinking, what is happening in the near future, you know. Obviously, we have to take this in account as well. It was really weird, yeah. Later in the week, Eric didn't think of arranging the Lord's Supper in a way that Margaret could participate. Margaret had to be back at the care home by evening, but we could have celebrate outside, for example, after the baptisms. We also had to remind them of their promise to attend the concert at the care home, which Margaret's daughter Marlies had specially organized for us. Eric and Wendy had agreed to it before their trip, but suddenly they didn't want to go. In the end, we celebrated the Lord's Supper at the care home. And once again, Eric took over without consulting us. How nice it would have been to let Stefan host and Margaret pray. She really prays so wonderfully, you know. Eric is always talking about teaching others how to fish. So why doesn't he let Stefan host and then have an appreciative conversation with him afterward? He was prepared. He wanted to host, actually, you know. Stefan has done so much for our group, and yet he wasn't even allowed to pray. And Margaret is, the whole time, he never asked him to pray. And Margaret is the solid oak tree of our group. Both of them are incredibly valuable and so loving. But Wendy and Eric came to our gatherings already with a preconceived opinion about Stefan. It's really sad, actually. They were so blinded by their own ego that they couldn't see what a true gem he is. And that's really sad. You know, he's a very humble person, really humble. So he didn't even he just said, oh, let him do it. And, you know, he didn't say, but I have prepared to actually do the Lord's Supper. He just let Eric do, you know.
Wow.
So,
Very
it
strange.
was always about being in control, showing off, you know. I think that's what's important to Eric, basically, you know.
So Stefan hosting, it would have taken the shine off, the limelight from Eric.
He does it really well as well. He's very engaging, you know. He brings everyone together, you know. And it's not about him talking all the time. He's got a really lovely manner on doing it, you know. So.
He has. I really enjoyed interviewing him.
Sweet guy.
Yes, he is. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. Let's return to our German gathering now and the debate in Sorge, where Eric used emotional control to suppress free speech. Eric and Wendy wanted to celebrate the Lord's Supper. Again, now we are in Germany, with us on Monday evening at our German gathering, but we told them things needed to be resolved between us first. The whole discussion felt chaotic. I was in a kind of freeze mode. I was traumatized, felt just numb, overwhelmed, and at my limit. I remember Wendy trying to send Markus out of the room. He felt belittled and refused to leave. And I said something around the lines, why do you manipulate him, you know? Just let him decide for himself. He's an adult, you know? To give you an idea of how petty the complaints were, I addressed them already in our response video. You know, Eric said when he was upset because I overlooked her at the concert in Margaret's care home. Well, I was busy filming the whole concert for Margaret since her daughter Marlies was one of the singers. When he would have noticed that if she had looked closely, apparently she said, I love you to me 3 times in front of witnesses, but I didn't say it back. I obviously was too hurt. Saying I love you back at that moment would have felt fake. It's telling that they made sure to emphasize she said it in front of witnesses. Why stress that? Talk is cheap. What really matters is how people show up for you, not just what they say. Anyone can say anything in the moment, but true connection is reflected in consistent actions. It's the things people do, not just their words, that count. Eric kept asking the same question over and over. Is there any sin that cannot be forgiven by us? Stefan answered, that's not the point. I told Sabine a while ago, if you guys go to Lutz, it's a breach of trust. That will ruin the spirit at our gatherings. Lutz is a toxic person, and you and Wendy don't realize that. He destroyed our German group, and he goes after the sisters who aren't as strong as I am. I just tell him to stop, but the sisters get really hurt and end up leaving. We've talked to him, asked him to change his behavior, but nothing changed. We are all really close. We stand by each other. We helped Margaret over the last 10 months since her stroke. Bridget's husband died, and even on this day, Lutz was fighting in the shed. This is what Stefan said. I wanted to say something too, but Eric insisted I could only answer if I addressed his question.
Are you kidding? Are you kidding?
No, he said that.
You can
No.
only. So Eric, is this Eric the Eric Wilson now that we're talking about? Not
Yeah.
a 7-year-old. Are you joking me?
I don't know. He said that. And you can imagine that I feel like my voice was restricted, you know.
I'm absolutely gobsmacked.
Yeah, that's what I was, you know.
Wow.
So I replied, we don't need to forgive toxic people before they change their behavior. Eric himself had sent, now it's getting interesting, the following message to someone before the gatherings when he was asked what forgiveness really means. And before I go into his message, Eric actually stopped us at that meeting. Don't go on about Luke 17 all the time, he said, you know. And I'm now saying, Eric wrote, Jesus says that we should forgive freely, in brackets 7 times, but that forgiveness is conditional on repentance. Pay attention to yourselves. If your brother commits a sin against you, give him a rebuke. And if he repents, forgive him. Even if he sins 7 times a day against you and he comes back to you 7 times saying, I repent, you must forgive him. Luke 17, 3 and 4. Love, agape, always seeks what is best for the object of that love. If we forgive when there is no repentance, then we are encouraging narcissistic behavior. That would not be loving. These were Eric's own words a few months before meeting us. Yeah, and that is what I've been talking about all along at our gatherings.
You know me. You know, I can talk and hold a conversation, but I am lost for words here, Sabine. Eric goes on about narcissism and toxicity, and he's the very person that's causing all of this. And he is talking to all of you with such, does he think, what kind of intelligence does he think you have? Does he not realize that you know what his game is?
And now we can expose this and name it clearly. You know, we don't have to hit around the bush. I also wrote to Wendy a year ago. So it was last January already, you know. And that's quite interesting because it paints the whole picture now. Wendy, by the way, really appreciated the following message I sent her. Yes, the fraction, I meant division, yeah. The fracture, I think I called it the fracture. And she can actually just look up if she still has our messages. She can look it up in January last year. She will find it. It's exactly the message, you know, the text message I sent her. Yes, the fracture, the division has left me heartbroken too. It's all so much more complex than it seems from the outside. There's also a lot of ego involved. This all really crushed me. I also realized that I need to take care of my well-being. I still haven't recovered from it. However, the door to our meetings has never been shut and is still wide open. I had quite an aha moment when reading Luke 17. I always overlooked that Jesus speaks of repentance as a prerequisite for the openly expressed forgiveness, which has nothing to do, of course, with the fact that I have already forgiven someone in my heart. I have come to realize it doesn't mean that we have to tolerate toxic, repeated behavior in the process of forgiving if someone doesn't repent. We don't have to become their doormats. That would not be healthy for us mentally and emotionally, and it would cripple us for the actual task we have been given. Many of us are traumatized in one way or the other. Realizing this, confiding in our Father and others, and seeking help to work through trauma is an important step in the healing process. However, toxic, repeated behavior without any self-reflection is a whole other level, as it can very quickly destroy a group if others no longer feel safe and heard, or at worst, feel even bullied. That's why I don't chase after anyone. Please don't get me wrong. I would be delighted if they came back with a positive attitude of their own accord. However, some boundaries would have to be set and the simple netiquette established. We should have done that much earlier, as Eric has suggested. It's just that the Germans don't like rules that much. He would have thought. Who would have thought that? I value.
Not me. Sorry, go on. That was cheeky.
I value so much the calm and productive atmosphere at the moment. We have quite sensitive and soft-spoken brothers and sisters in our group who are not so thick-skinned, some of them battling depression. Loving, understanding interaction with each other is so important. You would think you wouldn't really have to mention that among Christians. That was the end of my message. So she knew, that's what I want to say, that's another proof. She knew already for a year now, at least. Another point came to my mind. Wendy shouldn't have gotten involved at all, especially since it wasn't her place according to Luke 17, when your brother sins against you. So she was a bystander. She wasn't even involved. It was really an issue between our group and Lutz and had nothing to do with her. If she hadn't stepped out of line, we wouldn't be dealing with this whole issue now. I see all of this as a blessing in disguise, though, I have to say. After everything we went through with the two of them this summer and beyond, we really got to see their true nature. And honestly, we were shocked by what we saw.
So this is why it's very important, because Sabine, if we can all remember, time will pass long after we've done these interviews, but they're going to help other people. Yeah. That's what we need to remember, that the whole focus of doing this is to stop people joining groups that are toxic. We're not saying that we don't make that decision, but if it's going to stop somebody getting hurt, then mission accomplished.
And it seems quite common in Christian groups. I don't know why.
It's prolific. It's prolific. Yeah. It's all over the place.
Back to the debate at our German gathering. Eric was not satisfied, obviously. He kept still pushing the question of whether there is a sin that doesn't need to be forgiven by us, believers. He brought up the scene again when Jesus washed Judas Iscariot's feet and really emphasized that Jesus forgave Judas, or else he wouldn't have washed his feet. Stefan responded by saying that this was, I see Jesus.
Yeah, well done.
Not
yes.
Extra. That's really. In German, it's easier to pronounce. Meaning Eric was reading something into the story that wasn't actually there. The context suggested something else. Plus, Judas hadn't even betrayed Jesus yet, and there's still this thing called free will, right? So why would Jesus forgive him in advance? It just doesn't add up. He had always treated Jesus like one of his own. Judas, I meant. Eric got upset because Stefan dared to disagree with him. Maybe you remember, these were all things I told Wendy already in Switzerland. We were all on the same, not same page, but we had obviously all read John in our Bible readings, the US Zoo, our group. So we came to different conclusions about this theme, obviously.
Obviously, yes.
Yeah. So I asked, if we are supposed to forgive everyone, does that mean Wendy has forgiven the person who abused her? Was just talking about a few moments ago. Wendy immediately blurted out that she didn't have to forgive him. Again, without wanting to judge, I saw this as a double standard. Eric and Wendy set the rules. They asked me to forgive everything, but they weren't holding themselves to that same standard. I wasn't saying she had to forgive this person. It was just about unequal treatment again. Eric and Wendy just walk away, no longer seeing us as children of God, and dismiss all the standards of forgiveness. It's clear, double standards and hypocrisy, especially when they feel exposed, you know. They ignore rules, leaving your gift leaving your gift at the altar and making peace first, just saying, well, they are not true Christians anyway. So in their minds, they don't have to follow any of it. And to make it sound less harsh, they sugarcoat it by saying they keep praying for these people, meaning us, you know.
I'm all for reconciliation with other people where it's possible. But for it to be possible, there has to be an acknowledgement on both sides. When it's just one-sided, there's no reconciliation available. So that's why Jesus said you have to treat them like a man of the nations.
Yeah.
Okay. Do they honestly feel, Eric and Wendy, do you honestly feel that you can carry on doing your channel and your videos thinking that you've got God's blessing when just on the other side of social media, you've got this channel who are exposing you, and people are getting to know by the minute what you two are about, and yet you continue to blunder through as though there's no flies on you and you've got this halo around your head. Sorry. Yeah.
Talking about love all the time.
Yeah.
It's double standards, and
It is
lying to themselves, at least, you know. If they can't see it, then they are lying to themselves, you know, about it. You know, they find excuses for themselves. Yeah. This way, they seem to think it's okay to insult fellow Christians, call them names, and throw all sorts of things at them, behaving completely unchristian towards them. But what they don't seem to understand, and this is really important now, is who our neighbor really is. It's not our brother only, you know. Our neighbor isn't just a fellow believer. The core message of the parable of the Good Samaritan is about showing compassion and kindness to all people, regardless of their background or beliefs. It teaches the true neighborly love, that a true neighborly love means helping anyone in need, even if they are not from our community or circle. The lesson is to treat all people with kindness and empathy. So if we are saying Wendy doesn't have to forgive, then that would mean there is a sin after all that doesn't need to be forgiven. Honestly, what Eric was really doing here was trying to trap me with his question. I think it's called double bind, making it so that no matter how I answered, I'd look bad, basically. But he didn't expect me to bring up Wendy's abuser. As I said, I'd forgiven Lutz in my heart. I just couldn't trust him anymore. And it was really a group issue. So it should have been handled that way. That means Eric's whole argument with us was actually off topic. He didn't grasp what it was really about. Honestly, he was just trying to defend Wendy's behavior. That's how it felt, you know.
Yeah, instead of pulling her up and saying, you're out of order, you need to put
Yeah.
this right. Yeah, exactly. Go ahead, my friend. Sorry.
Now being allowed to speak, not being allowed to speak freely made us feel silenced and patronized. At one point, Eric actually shouted at Wendy and me to make up. I remember Wendy standing up, coming over to me and hugging me out of the blue. She still hasn't apologized for getting involved in attacking me in Switzerland, though, you know.
How does she
Yeah.
expect you to respond to that when she's come up and just given you a hug out of the blue, that hasn't done all the groundwork for the previous
No.
mess that she caused?
Yeah, there was this thank you for all what you did to me, but I did also some good things to you. It was something like that around the
Oh
line.
my
You know.
goodness.
Later, a brother mentioned in broken English that Wendy and Eric acted like business people. So this brother meant, I talked to him again, distant, formal, and cold. However, they probably understood it was just about money. That's, I think, they understood. So Wendy and Eric were furious when they heard that, you know. Wendy even used the F word, you know.
No.
Sure, she said something
No.
F
F
K
you. F
yeah,
you.
yeah.
Are you
Yeah.
joking me?
Oh, no.
And look at how I'm just going to go for it. Look at her. Look at how she appears on screen. F you.
Mhm.
Oh
Mhm.
my goodness, that's
Yeah.
disgusting. I'm
People also
shocked.
thought, yeah. People also thought they were favoring some brothers and sisters over others. Stefan's parents would have had an important story to share about their time as JWs and the mind-boggling stuff that had happened in their congregation. I've never heard such a hefty story before, I have to say. I mentioned it to Wendy before, but now she didn't seem interested in interviewing them any longer at any of our gatherings, even though they were long-term pioneers. Maybe it was their own fault for rocking up in their camper vans. I don't want to use the certain kind of word what is used in America for people living in camper vans.
Carry on, my friend.
Yeah. Another sister sadly said they didn't want to get to know her at least a little, but they were more than happy to accept her donation. That was also very sad. She was very disappointed. And she did a lot, you know. It's also someone who isn't wealthy, and she brought a lot of stuff, food to the drum gathering, you know, as well. The whole situation was so emotionally charged. Eric tried to control the conversation, cutting people off and silencing them. It was like we couldn't get a word in and couldn't express ourselves freely. That caused everyone to start talking over one and another all at once. It was complete chaos, you know. It wasn't about having an open conversation or clearing up the facts. It was all about Eric and Wendy justifying their actions and fixing or protecting Wendy's reputation by shifting the blame onto us. They had no problem bending the rules and applying double standards again. It felt like emotional control, creating a real unhealthy atmosphere. That's why I stayed out of it most of the time. It just went over my head, honest.
Yeah.
It goes without saying that we were also blamed for how the whole debate turned out. We were told they just wanted to celebrate peacefully the Lord's Supper with us. Frankly, under these circumstances, you know. Yeah, unbelievable.
Unbelievable. I mean,
I also,
that's
yeah, please.
sorry, I was just going to say they basically just wanted to not take responsibility for all the trouble they caused and to just do things the way that they wanted to do things. And they're
Yeah.
carrying on like nothing's happened. Complete 101% narcissistic behavior, as far as I'm concerned, my friend.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel that's what I have to say. Completely agree with you.
Mm-hmm.
I also didn't get why Eric had to take over the moderation again, you know, especially since he was personally involved himself. Wouldn't it have been smarter to let someone more neutral handle it? In the end, it was all about control, obviously.
That's the end of Sabine's interview, part 3A. In part 3B, we will be discussing mental illness, the effects of spiritual abuse, and how it leads to religious trauma syndrome. So please be sure to tune in when the video is uploaded. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. Take care now.